Here are the 100 idioms related to expensive and cheap, with examples and Korean translations of their actual meanings. These idioms capture various ways to express value, cost, and financial decisions in English, and the Korean translations help clarify their actual meanings. Expensive idioms. Break the bank. Example: that watch breaks the bank. Translation: Dani Neomu Manhai Dienda. Cost an arm and a leg. Example: this car costs an arm and a leg. Translation: Gagyogi Eomchongnij Basada. Pay through the nose. Example: we paid through the nose. Translation: Tiomuniabzi Basan Gabsul Chiliada. Highway robbery. Example: that rent is highway robbery. Translation: Neomunado Basada. Burn a hole in your pocket. Example: that bonus is burning a hole. Translation: Pipali Sugo Saipahida. Pricey as gold. Example: the ring is pricey as gold. Translation: Giamchialium Basada. Top dollar. Example: they paid top dollar. Translation: Gajang Basan Gagyogul Jibulhada. Buy the farm. Example: he bought the farm on vacation. Translation: Kayan Daniel Dulida. Diamond in the rough. Example: it's a diamond in the rough. Translation: Dedumeogigi Anhyun Bozog Gaitan Janje. Golden opportunity. Example: this is a golden opportunity. Translation: Sojungan Giho. Worth its weight in gold. Example: her advice is worth its weight. Translation: Meu Gachi Ista. Living high on the hog. Example: they're living high on the hog. Translation: Howalabga Sangwalhada. Pay a king's ransom. Example: he paid a king's ransom for that. Translation: Aongchongnan Daniel Jibulhada. Like money is no object. Example: he acts like money is no object. Translation: Dani Jungyo Haji Anhyun Geosholium Hangdonghada. Money talks. Example: in business, money talks. Translation: Dani Hamida. Money to burn. Example: they have money to burn. Translation: Namadonian Dani Manhada. Throw money around. Example: he throws money around carelessly. Translation: Daniel Nongbahada. Splash out. Example: they splashed out on a vacation. Translation: Kian Danul Suda. Roll in dough. Example: he's rolling in dough. Translation: Dani Meu Manhada. Made of money. Example: she must be made of money. Translation: Meu Buhada. Big bucks. Example: he's making big bucks. Translation: Kian Danul Biolda. Big spender. Example: he's known as a big spender. Translation: Daniel Pyongpung Shanayan Salam. Buy the moon. Example: they're trying to buy the moon. Translation: Aongchongnij Basan Geosul Salio Hada. Champagne taste on a beer budget. Example: she has champagne taste. Translation: Basan Shuyanj Jalionghan Yesin. The best that money can buy. Example: it's the best money can buy. Translation: Danulo Sal Su Isnun Chogwi Geos. Cash cow. Example: that product is a cash cow. Translation: Sugul Manhai Naenun Sangpam. Golden handshake. Example: he received a golden handshake. Translation: Tojig Si Bad Noon Geoegwi Tojigium. In the lap of luxury. Example: they live in the lap of luxury. Translation: Howalabga Sangwalhada. Go for broke. Example: they went for broke. Translation: Modian Geosul Geolda. Put your money where your mouth is. Example: put your money where your mouth is. Translation: Malhan Dalo Hangdonghada. The sky's the limit. Example: for him, the sky's the limit. Translation: Jahani Eobizda. Money makes the world go round. Example: money makes the world go round. Translation: Dani Sesingul Umjihinda. Money is no object. Example: for him, money is no object. Translation: Dani Munjega Doji Anhada. Flash the cash. Example: he loves to flash the cash. Translation: Daniel Guasahada. A fool and his money are soon parted. Example: a fool and his money are soon parted. Translation: Eolisiogian Salamayan Giambong Daniel Ilniunda. Spend like there's no tomorrow. Example: they're spending like there's no tomorrow. Translation: Daniel Magu Suda. Fortune favors the bold. Example, fortune favors the bold. Translation, Guagamhan Jage Hanguni Titaliunda. Throw good money after bad. Example, they're throwing good money after bad. Translation, Sanhai Bonunil Daniel Deo Suda. Penny wise, pound foolish. Example, that's penny wise, pound foolish. Translation, Jejun Geos Singyong Sugo Kayan Geosol Nochida. Live beyond one's means. Example, he's living beyond his means. Translation, Jasanui Sweeb Isingulo Sobahada. Overpriced junk. Example, that's just overpriced junk. Translation, Bisago Gachi Iobis Noon Muljan. Golden parachute. Example, she received a golden parachute. Translation, Tojig Si Bad Noon Geoegwi Tojigium. Out of one's price range. Example, that house is out of my price range. Translation, Ne Yesenil Neonda. No expense spared. Example, they spared no expense for the wedding. Translation, Byongyul Akiji Anhada. Fit for a king. Example, the meal was fit for a king. Translation, Meu Gojiab Seliabda. Live like a king. Example, he's living like a king. Translation, Howalabga Salda. Money for old rope. Example, that's money for old rope. Translation, Swibaj Bwanun Dan. A small fortune. Example, it cost a small fortune. Translation, Manhyun Dani Dioda. Shell out. Example, they shelled out for the tickets. Translation, Manhyun Daniel Suda. Spare no expense. Example, they spared no expense on the party. Translation, Byongyul Akiji Anhada. Cheap idioms. Cheap as chips. Example, those shoes are cheap as chips. Translation, Meu Jaliong Hada. On the cheap. Example, he bought it on the cheap. Translation, Jaliong Hage Gumaihada. Cut corners. Example, they cut corners on the project. Translation, Byongyul Jiagam Halyogo Dechungada. Dirt cheap. Example, it's dirt cheap right now. Translation, Meu Sada. For a song. Example, I got it for a song. Translation, Meu Jaliong Hage Iada. Get what you pay for. Example, you get what you pay for. Translation, Gagyoj Majnun Punjile ul Iada. Penny pincher. Example, he's such a penny pincher. Translation, Daniel Akinian Salam. Pinch pennies. Example, they're pinching pennies to save. Translation, Daniel Akita. Nickel and dime. Example, they nickel and dimed me. Translation, Sasahan Byongyul Gaisag Chunguhada. Budget friendly. Example, it's a budget friendly option. Translation, Jalionghan Siantag. Bang for your buck. Example, this product has great bang for your buck. Translation, Gashungbiga Joda. A steal. Example, that coat was a steal. Translation, Meu Saj Iada. Peanuts. Example, they paid peanuts for that. Translation, Aju Geogian Daniel Jibulhada. A dime a dozen. Example, these items are a dime a dozen. Translation, Hunhego Jalionghada. On a shoestring budget. Example, they're living on a shoestring budget. Translation, Aju Geogian Yesaneulo Salda. 2 for a penny. Example, those items are 2 for a penny. Translation, Meu Jalionghada. Not worth a dime. Example, that old car isn't worth a dime. Translation, Gachiga Geoiobista. As cheap as dirt. Example, these goods are cheap as dirt. Translation, Meu Jalionghada. Bargain basement. Example, I found it in the bargain basement. Translation, Aju San Gagyoj Gumaihada. Going for a song. Example, that house is going for a song. Translation, Aju Jalionghaje Panmidoda. Cut rate. Example, it's a cut rate deal. Translation, Halindo and Gagiog. Economical choice. Example, this is the economical choice. Translation, Bayangi Jaji Dunun Siantag. Penny dreadful. Example, that movie was penny dreadful. Translation, Meu Jalionghago Hyongpai Wanabsta. Low rent. Example, that hotel is low rent. Translation, Gabsi Jalionghada. A poor man's version. Example, it's the poor man's version of the iPhone. Translation, Deo Jalionghan Dechapam. Get more bang for your buck. Example, you get more bang for your buck with this plan. Translation Gagiog Debi Gachiga Deo Joda, a cheapskate. Example He's such a cheapskate. Translation in Sagan Salam, tight-fisted. Example He's tight-fisted with his money. Translation Daniel Jal Suji Anhada, down to the last penny. Example They're down to the last penny. Translation Majamag Naiman Donkaji Da Suda, bargain hunter. Example She's a bargain hunter. Translation Jaliumhan Muljianul Chajnun Salam, penny for your thoughts. Example Penny for your thoughts? Translation Sengagul Aliojumyan Jogista, not worth a plug nickel. Example That chair isn't worth a plug nickel. Translation Jayanhio Gachiga Iobizda, going for peanuts. Example These goods are going for peanuts. Translation Meu Jaliong Panmidoda, living on a shoestring. Example They're living on a shoestring. Translation Meu Geogian Danulo Salda, for a pittance. Example He works for a pittance. Translation Aju Geogian Daniel Bada, thrift store special. Example That dress is a thrift store special. Translation Aju Jaliong San Muljan, from rags to riches. Example He went from rags to riches. Translation Gananasio Buhijida, cut price. Example These clothes are cut price. Translation Halindo and Gagiog, it won't cost a dime. Example Don't worry, it won't cost a dime. Translation Bayangi Gioe Dulji Anhada, cheap as nails. Example That product is cheap as nails. Translation Meu Jaliong deal of the century. Example That car is the deal of the century. Translation Chogui Giole, stretch your dollar. Example You need to stretch your dollar. Translation Daniel Alttelhage Suda, on the house. Example The drinks are on the house. Translation Gungjalo Jegongduda, chump change. Example That's just chump change for him. Translation Aju Geogian Don, in the bargain bin. Example I found it in the bargain bin. Translation Halindo and Gagyogulo Gumaihada, tighten your belt. Example We need to tighten our belts. Translation Hialitalil Jolamaida Jaliagada, economize. Example We need to economize on groceries. Translation Jaliagada, penny saved is a penny earned. Example A penny saved is a penny earned. Translation Jaliagi God Bioliodulan Denida, scrape by. Example They're scraping by on one salary. Translation Gio Miogo Salda, rock bottom prices. Example These shoes are at rock bottom prices. Translation Choajeo Gagyogulo Panmidoda, cheap idioms continued. Get a good deal. Example I got a good deal on it. Translation Joum Gagyoj Sasta, on a budget. Example We're traveling on a budget. Translation Yesain Mikwoseo Yohangada, budget conscious. Example She's very budget conscious. Translation Jichulul Sinjunghage Handa, bargain basement prices. Example These are bargain basement prices. Translation Choajeogalo Panmidoda, go for a bargain. Example That jacket went for a bargain. Translation Saj Palida, for a mere pittance. Example He works for a mere pittance. Translation Aju Geogian Daniel Badgo Ilhada, not worth the paper it's written on. Example That contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. Translation Jayanhio Gachiga Iobizda, tight purse strings. Example They keep tight purse strings. Translation Daniel Meu Jaliagada, save a bundle. Example I saved a bundle on my car. Translation Kngiamajal Jaliagada, cheap thrill. Example That movie was a cheap thrill. Translation Gabsaj Jolgil Su Isnun Olagioli, for next to nothing. Example I got it for next to nothing. Translation Geoi Gungjalo Iada, as good as free. Example That service is as good as free. Translation Geoi Gungjana Dalium Ubsta,